Okay. What are we doing here? What am I doing with my life? I really should stop asking that question to myself because I feel like, and this is just how I think about life. I feel like being introspective kind of leads you to get a mental breakdown. I feel like every single person who had a mental breakdown in the history of humanity was always just a bit too introspective about their life beforehand, just like a few seconds beforehand. They'll be just sitting around, and suddenly they'll ask themselves, "What is life? Why am I here?" And boom, 5 seconds later, they're on the ground crying about and listening to Karma Police for like the 30th time that day. In a Lonely Place is a movie that was made in 1950. And it was directed by Nicholas Ray, who, in my opinion, right next to Billy Wilder and Kirk Douglas. Yes, Kirk Douglas. It's not Douglas Kirk. I think it's Kirk Douglas. In my opinion, Nicholas Ray, alongside those two directors, was one of those directors who really helped the golden age era of Hollywood movies become. He helped those movies to become more mainstream and become more modern and become more cynical and more authentic. It kind of, they paved a new way of films that felt less like the white picket fence endings of the really glossy, overly sentimental and sappy films, and they showed much more they showed a much more darker sense of reality. They showed a much more hideous sense of humanity. They even showed a much more darker viewpoint of Hollywood in general, which was really controversial at the time. So there's a reason why films like Written in the Wind, or All That Heaven Allows, or the fucking Sunset Boulevard were such great films back in the day, even to this day, because those were the movies that really helped Hollywood movies in general to become a bit more relatable. Because I feel like a lot of the films from the 50s kind of exchanges authenticity and relatability with like very over the top dramatics. They kind of exchange it with really sappy and sacramental, and it's like I said, the white picket fence ending. It's always the mysterious woman and the mysterious man. They meet at a bar. They kind of argue at first, but then they kind of become friends. Somebody dies. There's like a murder, and they have to figure out who the murderer is. Somebody gets framed. Usually the guy, sometimes the girl, and then they just fall in love while solving the mystery, and then no matter what kind of personal problems they have, they just end up being happy in a white picket fence house with a son, maybe a girl. Who the fuck cares? They're babies. They all look the same. In a Lonely Place is definitely not one of those movies, and I liked it, and I feel like because of that, I appreciate it more. And it definitely deals with a topic that really deserves a much more cynical and honest approach. This film proves that certain serious issues are much more effective when it's done in a much more cynical tone, in a much more unflinching tone. Now, In a Lonely Place stars Humphrey Bogart as Dixon Steele and Gloria Grahame as Laurel Gray as the love interest. And Dixon Steele is a screenplay writer, but right at the beginning of the movie, he kind of becomes involved in a murder case because he invites this woman, not Laurel Gray, but he invites this woman over. Then she kind of annoys him, so he just sends her away, and that night she gets murdered, and that's why everybody thinks he's the murderer. But right at the beginning, we know for a fact that he didn't do it, and this is a very smart move for the film. This is a very smart move for the film. I think that's the grammatically correct sentence, because I think it's a good move, because that way the film doesn't really, it doesn't fuck, what's the word? My brain's not working today. It doesn't distract you with a useless plot. We know what's going on, so the film really focuses on the main theme, which I'll talk about a bit later. And Laurel Gray kind of becomes more than a love interest, and I feel like as the film really goes on, she takes a larger role. And I'm just gonna mention just the single flaw of the movie, and the one thing that I just didn't like about the film. Gloria Grahame's performance in the beginning of the movie is just kind of a generic film noir performance, like, oh, I'm the mysterious woman who talks mysteriously and talks in a very, at times, very direct, but at times kind of this vaguely romantic way that, and you don't know who I am, you don't know my past, and I don't open my eyes all the time, like, I just kind of half open my eyes like Marilyn Monroe to get that smoky mystery in there, and it feels boring, but as the film goes on, that acting becomes much more lively and much more animated, and in the end, she just gives a better performance. And before I get into the main theme, I want to talk about two things. One, the writing. Again, Nicholas Ray, alongside Billy Wilder and Kirk Douglas, really helped Hollywood movies to become more blunt and cynical and honest, and the writing here is absolutely great. The sense of humor is so modern. When the characters are direct, it doesn't feel gimmicky. It doesn't feel like it's cynical by force. It feels natural. The cynicism kind of seeps into the main characters, and because we're so aware of the characters now, because the film's very good at kind of portraying these characters and kind of like showing the character arc, and because the writing is so good, when it comes to the characters, this cynicism feels natural. And the subtlety when it comes to expressing romance is really good here, because with most movies, especially in this period, I feel like if you're not a musical, because if you're a musical, you sing about love, but when you're not a musical, they always have this one scene where they're just talking about how much they love each other, and sure, sometimes it's needed, but I feel like those films kind of forget that they're working within a visual medium, and you can just show something, and we, audience members, are smart enough to understand that certain people who are in certain positions in a room are in love. And this film does exactly that. There's one scene where they basically just kind of break the fourth wall and explain that this is how films should express romance. There is Humphrey Bogart's character cutting some grapefruit on the counter, and there's Gloria Grahame's character just sitting kind of in a daze because she just came out of a deep sleep, and you would know instantly, just watching that scene, that these two people are in love. And this film just kind of explains that, but it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel gimmicky, yet again, because Dixon Steele, Humphrey Bogart's character, is a screenplay writer. It makes sense that he's explaining this. So, again, screenplay-wise, this film just nails it. It uses various gimmicks, but by making these characters part of the gimmick, it feels natural. Now, the main theme is really the great strength of the movie. The film deals with the theme of anger issues, and not anger issues that's provoked by alcoholism or drug use. No, just anger issues. People who get just a tad bit too violent and emotional when something happens. Maybe some people don't trust them. Maybe they just get angry, but they just act out just a bit too much compared to the regular person. Now, obviously, because it's the 50s, the way the anger issues and the emotional explosions in the film are portrayed is it's slightly less violent than the real thing, and I should know, I've seen a few instances, unfortunately within the family, but I digress. But the film captures the emotion perfectly. The emotion is, because the acting's so good, usually from Gloria Grahame, and that's why I'm saying that her performance gets better as the film goes on. At first, she's just kind of the mysterious woman, but as Laurel Gray and Dixon Steele's romance progresses, her association with Dixon Steele and Dixon Steele's anger issues progresses as well, and because of that, her performance should become more animated, and it does become more animated because her character becomes more emotional, and that's why her performance, my mouth isn't working. That's actually a really hard, I know I'm kind of derailing a lot in this review, but performance is one of those words that's really hard to pronounce if you're Korean. Like, in Korea, performance is pronounced performances, so the R's are totally gone. So when I try to say performance, I'm basically forcing every single muscle in my tongue to just blah. And so at first, here's why I think the film is really good at portraying the theme of anger issues, and just how, just the emotions of the people who has the anger issues, who has the temper problem, and the emotions of the people who are associated with that person. Now, at first, Laurel Gray's character blames herself for Dixon Steele's little violent ways, which is something that happens a lot of the time, when it comes to people who are within very unstable relationships. Sometimes the person who's kind of getting the bitter end of that relationship kind of blames himself or herself. But she constantly talks about how she doesn't want this to go on, kind of showing that victim mentality, but at the same time this wanting of things to get better. And there are so many amazing scenes where Gloria Grahame just nails this look of pain, of being scared and being unable to trust this person that she loves, which is a scary idea. And I love how this theme, this mood of, being unable to trust each other, and this person not being able to control his temper, I love how it all kind of builds within the word of mouth. Everybody starts talking about his anger issues, and, even though he's trying to become a better person, everybody just kind of forces that image onto him, or maybe they just kind of talk about his past actions, past instances where he was violent, and they try to hide it. They try to act like they don't know about it, but it just kind of comes out. And because of that, the person, Dixon Steele's character, realizes nobody's trusting him, nobody likes him, everybody's kind of afraid of him. And that provokes his anger issues. And I love how they portray this really terrible cycle. Your past comes to haunt you even though you try to change. And the way your past comes to haunt you is not really your fault. It's because everybody else kind of forces that past to come back to you. And you just kind of cave in to that peer pressure, that image that everybody's giving you, that everybody's framing onto you. And as this cycle goes on, when the film gets physical, and when, Dixon Steele really goes to Laurel Gray, and when he gets physical, although there's no real, nobody's, punching each other in the face, nobody's slapping each other in the face, but when it gets physical, maybe it's because of the lighting, maybe it's because of the acting, maybe it's because of the music, but something about it feels personal and dark and disturbing, and I like the fact that the film understands that this theme is nothing to just fuck around with. It's a serious idea. This is, I imagine in the 50s this was a much more, nobody probably talked about this kind of stuff in the open, but it must have been something that was happening in almost every household, because back then, the male image was much more conservative, and maybe, men were slightly more violent with their kids, and this should have been something that might have been that might have felt really close to home, even back then, and even now. So, the film understands that this is a dark subject, and the film goes for that dark route of portraying this subject. And the film very smartly gives us an ending that fits perfectly to the mood. It's a totally unflinching ending, because at the end, things get physical, and then a call comes. This is not, by the way, if you're in an improv group, do not do this. Just do this, because this is how you actually hold a phone. So a call comes, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but a certain conflict resolves. A certain main conflict resolves. So Laurel Gray's character's main inner conflict is resolved with this one call. But because things have gotten physical already, Laurel Gray, the character, says that it's too late. And the film acknowledges the fact that it's too late. So in the end, they don't get together. They separate. And that is the way that it should have been. It should have went. I almost expected the film to just kind of pussy out at the end and just say, oh, everything's fine, we can be in love, anger issues, what's that? But no, the film says, yes, This is some serious shit. We're gonna end it. The relationship ends here, and I appreciate that so much. And I feel like a lot of this, a lot of the reason, the main reason why a lot of this works is because of Humphrey Bogart's performance. This might be his best performance that I've seen of his, because I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a big Humphrey Bogart fan. I just never was. You know, he's always been like that stone-faced, cold film noir actor, but that's always been my main problem with him. He's not animated. He's not emotional. His expression is always the fucking same. And even though the way he enunciates and the way he speaks, yes, it has a presence to it, but when his face is literally the same expression all the fucking time, I kind of have a hard time emoting to the stuff he's doing, and what he's saying, what he's experiencing. And maybe because of that, I'm not the biggest fan of Casablanca. You can kill me in the comments all you want, but it's always been Humphrey Bogart. Like, I love the entire movie except for Bogart's performance. So kill me if you want. I mean I do like Casablanca. I just don't love Casablanca. But here, not only does he nail that the cynical humor, because he kind of has that tone where he can really portray sarcasm and that cold sense of cynical humor. But he also nails the violent tempers that he needs to express. This is one of his most detailed, one of his most animated, one of his most expressive performances that I've ever seen. And just because of that, it's my favorite of his. And like I said, the only flaw is Gloria Grahame's performance in the first half of the movie. After that, she gets so much better because the screenplay becomes much more serious and much more dramatic in a good way, not in a forced way. So, yeah, In a Lonely Place, it's a good movie. Everybody should see it. If your parents are violent fuckheads, you'll probably relate to it in a very disturbing way, and if you don't want to have that happening to you with your brain and that mental psychology bullshit, don't watch it. But if you just want to see a movie from the 50s, a film noir film that deals with a very realistic, personal, and disturbing subject in a very authentic and mature way compared to most of the films from that era, if you want to see one of those movies, this is a perfect choice. I mean, Nicholas Ray movies in general are great choices for that kind of, for those kinds of movies. So yeah, I have nothing else to say. This review's long enough. Nobody wants to hear a fucking Korean kid talking about a film from the fucking 50s for 18 minutes. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody. So, this is where it's gonna end. In a Lonely Place. I did the review. Bye.